Hello, I'm Josh Hallam, and you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we talk about films we think might be underrated, underseen, or we just wanted to talk about them. This week, it is, of course, Superman 2. So, let's see what we think. Alice.
Oh, they're just... iconic, amazing, powerful, atmospheric.
Superman 2, then. That is what the song I've just hummed is from.
In case you didn't get it.
You picked this one. Superman 2, then. So tell the lovely people at home what Superman 2 is about. Why did you pick it? Is it underrated? Is it underseen? I just want to talk about Superman 2. Go!
So Superman 2 is the sequel to Superman from 1978. So in this one, Lois Lane figures out that Superman is Clark Kent. They profess their love for each other. And to make sure they can be together, Superman gives up his powers to become a normal man. I guess because now this means that they can bang without risking the safety of Lois's pelvis, right? But what Superman doesn't know when he makes this decision is that 3 villains dressed in black PVC want to take over the world. They are General Zod, Ursa, and Non. So then Superman decides he needs to turn back into Superman to save the planet. Why did I pick it? Well, I love, being honest with you, Josh, and with you listeners. So I have made a mistake here. And I thought that Superman 2 was underrated, but I think I may have got confused with Superman 3, which they're both on my list. I think I said last week that Superman 2, on my list of films to pick for this podcast, Superman 2 is the first one. Like, it's the first one listed, right? So I was like, yeah, it's time to do Superman 2. I think it's underrated and all this. But then obviously ahead of the episode, I went back to check the critical reception, and I was like, oh, that's actually not as low as I thought it was. So then I wonder if I got the numbers mixed up with Superman 3 instead. So I thought it was underrated. Having looked at the numbers again, I don't think it is. So we're going to do this as one that I just wanted to talk about and a bit of a revisit because I haven't seen it for many, many years since I was a child. So it's a bit of that, bit of a nostalgia kick for me. But yeah, fucked up for our listeners.
And that's the end of the
I've got
episode,
one job.
so thank you very much for joining us.
You've got one job on this podcast.
So this was the first one. So you agreed to come on the podcast, regretted it ever since. But in that time, you've had as we both do, list of films. I'm going to do this one day. So this was the first one on there, right?
It's the first one on there. I don't know why.
Straight in there, bish bash bosh, Superman 2.
Yeah.
So why now?
Why now? I guess because my list is wearing pretty thin. Like, I'm running out of films, Josh. Like, I look at the list and it's just all stuff I've done. I'm like, oh, look, Fear and Loathing. Oh, no, wait. Oh, look, Catfish. Oh, no, wait, done that. So this, and because it was on the top of the list, and I thought it was, a bit of something, like, we had you with Sly Stallone recently, so it's like me with Christopher Reeve, like the big strong men that we love for different reasons. I know you love your strong men. But anyway, had you seen this one before, John?
So I was watching it and I thought, I don't know if I've ever watched this all the way through.
Okay,
a bit like Terminator 2. I was like, I've definitely seen this. But also, I don't know if I've ever sat and been like, I'm putting it on now and watched it from start to finish. So obviously, I knew loads about it. So it felt like I'd seen it before, but I don't know if I've ever sat and watched it start to finish with a critical eye. But it's one of those films that has been referenced and parodied so much that I felt like I'd seen it. But I'd definitely seen all of it, just perhaps not in one go. So yes, I had seen this one before. So obviously, let's get stuck into it then. So you've already touched on the fact that you've dropped the ball there, Alice. You've dropped the kryptonite ball.
Made a mistake. You've got one job coming on this podcast, Alice. Make it underrated or underseen. I definitely don't think it's underseen. And I checked financially. It did pretty fucking well. So.
Yeah, it's not underseen. There's no way.
Nope.
It's underseen. But it could be underrated, but we'll come to that in a bit because I haven't seen that, so I'm interested to know what you think.
There we go. Yeah, maybe.
What did you like about it then? Having watched it with a critical eye, what did you like about Superman 2?
So, Josh, there is a heck of a lot that I like about this film, and I won't be able to get into it all in great detail, but here are the main things. So, this is all kind of like a couple of points that I'm going to mold into one point. So the performances, the delivery, and elements of the script I think are fantastic. So Christopher Reeve is just so perfect as Superman. I think he absolutely nails it. And I think Margot Kidder as Lois Lane is also great. And because she's quite an intense character, and she and Superman complement each other really quite well because he's quite chilled out. You've got Gene Hackman, who just seems to be having the best time as Lex Luthor, and then Terrence Stamp as General Zod. Now, Zod is just such a terrific
Kneel
villain.
before Zod.
Oh, he's so good. So he's not that big of a guy, but he has such an imposing presence. His voice, the intensity in his eyes, the way he delivers his lines is all so powerful. And it's interesting to have that up against Superman, who is so physically dominant, but he is quite chilled and pretty mellow in how he presents himself. Like, he's not there to scare anyone, is he? Whereas Zod wants you to know when he's entered the fucking room. But it's an interesting turn then that he also has a couple of really funny lines. So when he's at the White House, I believe the president says something like, "There's one man here on Earth who will never kneel before you," to which Zod replies, "Who is this imbecile? Where is he?" And then another a little later on where he's talking to Lex Luthor and he says, "Why do you say these things when you know I will kill you?" Yet giving him these comedy moments doesn't diminish how threatening he feels on screen. And I feel like there's a real risk when you do that your villain just becomes cheesy and not really scary anymore. But, oh, Josh, he's just so good. That actor, that character, I absolutely love him.
So it's an iconic role for him, isn't it? It's one of those roles, like, he's done plenty of other stuff. You know, he's in Star Wars, he's done like The Limey, he's done loads of stuff, but he'll always be General Zod.
Oh, it's just even the name like invokes fear into you. It's like General Zod. It's not just Zod, is it? He's General Zod. It just gives him those like extra layers of power. So I think like just brilliant casting, brilliant actors all around. I think some of it looks outstanding. So particularly the Fortress of Solitude, like it looks familiar yet alien at the same time. And there's different color lights and different glows depending on what's happening in there. And you just feel like you're about to see something important every time you're there. So the moment when Superman relinquishes his powers, he's like in this ice chamber thing, and then he leaves it and sort of comes out as human, but his Superman image remains in the chamber. And I thought this looked brilliant, you know, and sticking with the way it looks, I absolutely love the honeymoon suite at Niagara Falls, right? This really ostentatious and grossly romantic and sexual room. It's just the absolute worst place to put two people who aren't in a romantic relationship. And just in general, I think the visual and special effects are pretty good. They're clearly old, but they don't feel bad, if you know what I mean.
There's a touch of the Doctor Who's. There's a touch of the like,
oh yeah,
interesting. It's shit, but it's good. Like, you wouldn't want it to be any better. Like, so I know what you mean. Like, there's a few bits which I'll come on to which maybe aren't as good, but I know if they remastered this like the way they keep doing with Star Wars, you'd be like, oh, just leave it alone. Like, I know that CGI wasn't really a thing back then, and effects weren't as good as they are now. Just like in 30 years, the effects that we've got now, you know, won't look pretty shit or whatever. So there is an element of that sort of kitsch value, that nostalgia, like everything sort of looks like it's made out of cardboard, but you don't mind because it gives it a real charm.
Yeah, it just sort of kind of adds to the atmosphere and adds to the whole feeling of it.
Even though this film was the most expensive film of all time when it was made.
I think really?
So.
Yeah.
It was definitely. Because if you think about the first Superman, it was a massive hit. It was a monster hit. Then this came along. I think it probably did better, but I don't know off the top of my head. So it's not.
No, so it didn't.
It didn't do as well as the first
better
one.
Financially. It did. It got back like 3 times its budget or something like that, like into the hundreds of millions. But it wasn't as much of a financial success as the first one. I do know that little bit.
Touch of the Batman Returns then. So a hit, but just not as big a hit as the first one, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's still good.
Yeah, so it's like you say, it was a massive hit. So, but yeah, the effects, the costumes. Something actually I want to touch on that you said there. Casting, it is pretty perfectly cast. There's no one in this film you think you could question certain elements of performance, but I think we'll come on to that because I don't think it's performance so much as place and time. But there's no one in this who's miscast. It's so well cast.
I felt that everyone just felt right. Everyone felt like they were right where they were supposed to be. And it all just worked, and they all worked so nicely together because you've got some quite extremes of personality, like not just with Superman and Lois, but then like with the villains. So then with Jod. Excuse me, I'm combining General Zod there. Jod, you know, Jod, scary Jod.
Oh my
General
Jod,
Ursa, and Nod. So I feel like they will complement each other really well, and they all just kind of understand the assignment, and they just nail it. Did you like it?
So there's there's lots to like in there. I mean, it's a classic, isn't it? So I think, what did I like?
It is a little bit classic.
So overall, just to sort of feed off what you said there, it feels very cinematic. That opening through space with the explosions and the credits coming up, you know, making an event around the credits. That's very much, it's quite a comic booky thing. And it's something that's become a little bit lost, I think, nowadays, because it's probably seen as a bit cheesy. But making a thing out of the credits, making a thing out of the credits, and making a thing out of a flashback to the last one. You know, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films do this, and it's no coincidence that it did this after Superman 2 did it. So one thing I do want to say is that I'm a massive comic book fan. I'm a massive Superman fan. The Superman films don't get the credit they deserve for how influential they were. Without Superman 1 and 2, there's not really anything else, because they took a big gamble on the first Superman film. Like, is this going to work? Is it going to be too cheesy? Are we going to melt him up like he can fly and he can do all the things that he can do? Or is it going to fall in its arse? Famously, it was a massive success, and this film followed it. But without that, there's no Batman, there's no X-Men, there's no Spider-Man, and then there's no Marvel Cinematic Universe, DC Universe, all that sort of stuff. So if you're into your comic books, you know, you got this film and the one before it to thank, really. I know an argument could be made that they would have, you know, something else would have come along, but for me, you know, this is like the Wizard of Oz of superhero films. Without this, as in this and the first one, there's no, because this was made immediately after it, right? It's made almost in conjunction with the press release, right? Yeah, so
but then something like because they had to switch directors, because then they dropped the first director, so then the second director refilmed a lot of it, and then it was a bit problematic. And I think this all sort of ties in with the idea of the curse of Superman, which is a whole different thing,
which is pretty much gone.
They were
now.
Trying to make them at the same time.
They were. So which you can read about. It's a very famous story. And then Richard Donner, who directed the first one and a lot of this, has then done his own cut of the film, which you can watch, which is a lot different. So the influence of the films is there. It feels very cinematic, and that is down in no part. Like I say, the opening credits, the feel of the film, the look of the film, the music. I have to say, I mean, I don't know if we've done. I don't know how many films we've done where John Williams has done the score, right? But for me, I love cinematic music. I love Hans Zimmer, James Horner, James Newton Howard, Danny Elfman. John Williams is the master. He sets the bar. Do you know what I mean? He set the bar for this more modern period of filmmaking. It feels so epic. It feels so, everything he's done, this, Star Wars, all the other things he's done, it feels so epic, and it's just brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of music. It goes perfectly with the character. And it really sets the tone. If the music wasn't as good, the film wouldn't be as good. Back to what you do with the casting. Obviously, Christopher Reeve was already cast as Superman because he'd done one before, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he is the cinematic Superman.
So it just fits. Yeah, it's like he stepped into a glove.
Yeah,
or something.
I love
it's just perfect.
I do like Henry Cavill as Superman. I think he's really, really good. Yeah, but
he does all right. Yeah,
he doesn't get the chance to do, or what he hasn't had the chance to do yet, which they do in this, is differentiate really well between Clark Kent and Superman. Because, and that's nothing to do with Henry Cavill as an actor in these films. He differentiates so well between Clark Kent and Superman. His posture, his gait, his speech, the way he looks. Like he's so nerdy as Clark Kent, and then he's so heroic as Superman. He toes the line so well. Like he is Superman, isn't he? It's like he just is. It's iconic. Like you say, great villains, Zod and his cronies, like doing really stupid but dastardly things, like changing Mount Everest and stuff like that. Gene Hackman,
Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. What did I say?
You mean Mount Rushmore?
No, Mount Everest. Yeah, they
yeah,
Mount Rushmore. Sorry, they changed Mount Rushmore and they put their own faces on it. And like you said, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, just having a time of his life, chewing the absolute fuck out of some scenery. It's very, very cinematic, and that is pretty much what I liked about it. That's all I could say. It feels like an event film. It feels like a piece of cinematic history. It's a classic, isn't it? It is.
Yeah. Did you sort of feel that similar gravity? Like I remember I felt it when we watched like The Great Dictator and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Like you just feel like you're really, I don't know, just like you feel it coming off the screen almost. Like you just feel like you're really witnessing something big.
You almost, I think a good film like that, or like the other films we talked about, carries with it the weight of the time. So going in with the same expectations of this is going to be good or it's not or whatever, but you should be able to feel what the sort of, and this is going to be a really wanky way of putting it, but you should be able to feel what the zeitgeist of the time was, which The Great Dictator does and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes does, and this definitely does. You can definitely feel that sort of not post war, but like almost
sort of middle of the Cold War.
Yeah, that sort of like we need a hero type feeling, which it's it's no secret to say we have now. That's why comic films are the main successful genre in cinema now. Whether people are feeling the fatigue or not is a conversation for other people to have, because I probably won't feel the fatigue because I just love them.
You love them.
But these things come in circles, don't they? During the height of the Cold War, it was Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They're coming over to get you type films.
Yeah.
Westerns were, they had their place. Comic book films, they had their place. 80s comedies, they had their place. And this is definitely one of those films that carries with it that weight of the time, and I think that's why it stood the test of time in a lot of ways. Not all the ways, but in a lot of ways. But anyway, what else did you like about it? Because obviously you picked this, you've clearly got a lot of affection for it. Hit me with what else you liked about it.
So just to touch on, you did mention there, so they do that thing at the beginning where it's like a reminder of what happened in the first film. So it's just the images. I don't think you get any of the audio or any of the dialogue, but it's cut to the music, to the big music that we love. And I just thought this was such a good way to remind the audience, to catch the audience up. Like, I feel like it could have been so bad, and maybe on paper you'd be like, oh, are we really going to do this? Like, just fucking spoon feeding the audience? Like, isn't this aren't you just going to feel sort of hollow watching this, and like it's a waste of time and like you don't feel anything? But because the music, I think, is doing so much of the heavy lifting, and I think it was very smart to mute the dialogue in this instance and just have that music playing, and then you just
completely agree.
I don't know, it just absorbs you into it. The music is it's phenomenal, and it gives me such a potent emotional reaction every time I listen to it. I also actually thought it was quite emotional at times. So like, it's the big hero, it's very actiony and quite funny, but then there was also some really like emotionally strong moments. So when Superman is at the Fortress of Solitude to give up his powers, he's talking to like an AI image of his mum, where she's explaining what giving up his powers will actually mean. And then towards the end of the conversation, she sort of steps out of, like, I think she's on like a screen, like it almost feels like it's a bit of a projection or something. And she steps out and she appears to actually be there in her like kryptonite form. I was going to say human form, but no, she's Kryptonian form. And she goes towards him, and then they have this really tender moment where she's like, oh, my love, are you sure? Because obviously, I guess they've programmed, because she goes through in detail, like, you will be a real man, you will hurt a real man, you will die like a real man, and all this. And they've obviously, the Fortress of Solitude has been created to have the ability to let him do that. So it's like they've prepared for every eventuality. It's like, oh, well, if he falls in love with a human woman,
like, it's meant to be like a Swiss Army knife of possibilities, I think.
Yeah, and so they're like, everything she's saying just feels like, oh yeah, this was just written and she's just reading it off a script, and this is all, like, it's like she isn't really there. This is just like an answer phone message or whatever sort of thing. And then that moment when she steps away and she looks like she's actually there, oh, that really punched me in the gut, because it was like, oh, she stopped being an AI for a minute and now she's just his mum. Like, she's not this disembodied voice. She is actually there, and she, is sort of feeling a mixture of fear and of pride that her son would choose to do this. Because obviously it's very scary thinking, well, now my son is going to potentially die,
and you definitely,
right?
But then you also have that thing with Superman where that they're dead and they've been dead for years, so he can't actually talk to him. It's all just pre-recorded. And then I think the way also the film also carries with it the thing of, unfortunately, everyone knows what happened to Christopher Reeve. So there is a touching. There's always a touch of sadness, I think, when you see him and as a man in his physical prime, knowing what unfortunately happened to him, which was truly tragic and awful. Like I actually didn't realize until I watched this again how young he was when he died. I thought he was a little bit. I didn't realize he was only in his early 50s. Yeah, and obviously you see this, and he is a cinematic hero, and obviously you know what happens with him. So it does carry with it a real sense of sort of forlornness and melancholy sort of thing. So I know what you mean. That scene definitely carries with it some weight. Okay then, so let's move on to things we would change about the film or perhaps we didn't like. Now, we've both been quite effusive in our praise. We've both got into it a lot, but I know I've got a few bits to talk about. But let's start with yourself, Alice. What would you change about the film? What don't you like about it? Hit me with it.
So there are two big things that really do bother me about it, and then a couple of smaller offenders that weren't too bad but were still noticeable. But I'll start with the big fellas. So Superman doesn't stay human for long enough, right? So he gives up his powers, and it's really dramatic and really emotionally charged, and this is like such a huge decision, and he's been chatting about it with his dead mum. But what we see after it happens is a couple of cutaways of him and Lois in the bed. You know, we assume that they've been able to be intimate with one another, so that's great. And then they go to a diner. He gets in a fight, sees Zod on TV saying, "Come and kneel before me, Superman," or something like that. And then that's it. He says, "Oh, well, I have to go back then." Then he walks to the Fortress of Solitude to get his powers back. And the whole thing feels like it's about 5 minutes. Like he's in this human form for about 5 minutes. Like this is such a main part of the film. Like if you go on IMDb, the main descriptor of this film is that it's the one where Superman gives up his powers. Yeah. But he gives them up for what feels like a few moments, and it makes it feel just so insignificant. Like I needed more. I need more of him just living.
There's a lack of jeopardy, isn't there? Because there's two things at play there. One, it's not long enough, and two, he just gets his powers back. So it's like...
Yeah, it just happens. Easy peasy.
If you give up your powers, that's it. You're a man, and you're immortal, and you'll die. Except, that's bollocks. You can just have them back. It's like...
And the way that, like, to have gone from... And I think the reason that this affected me so much is to go from that conversation that he has with his dead hologram mum, who's like, "Oh, my love, are you sure?" Like... And then it's just like, "Oh, well, actually, I'll just get him back then because some dude punched me and now Zod is here to take over the world." Like, where's the sacrifice? And I guess it diminishes the sacrifice. So I was kind of annoyed at that. Like, I just needed more. I need the fact that when he turns back into Superman, that needs to be a bigger deal. There needs to be more going on there. So I want to see him doing a few more human-y things. I want to see a few more moments where he's really impacted by his weakness, because I think you could have done so much with like the little things that he can't do anymore. Like, oh, he can't just pop out to this place or that place, or oh, I can't just fly my way out of this situation. Like, it's literally, he sees Zod, another Kryptonian who's here, ready to kill everyone on Earth, to enslave the Earth, whatever it is. And then it's like, oh, well, I've got to go back. And it's like, oh, well, I don't know, it just left me, I wanted more, Josh. It just left me feeling a bit hollow.
I know what you mean, and I think, so that sort of brings me on to what I was going to say, and I'll come back to your other point as well. This film is a bit of a victim of its own success. Because it was the first massive, this and the sort of lump them in together, right? But because they are the first big, massive comic book success, everything that comes back to it after it almost informs the way you look back at it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're looking at it going, well, that wouldn't have happened in this and this and this. So it happens in this. And there's an element, I think, of how, like I say, it's been a victim of its own success. So it looks like it's aged worse than it actually has because of how successful it was and how influential it was. But we'll come back to that. What was your other point?
So the other thing is, so the villains' deaths are just utterly anticlimactic. Like, they just sort of slide away off screen and they get pushed down a hole. We don't actually see them die, and there's not much of a fight because they get their powers taken away. And, like, I know that, they might want to... They've been thinking like, oh, let's keep them alive for future films or whatever. It's like, oh, you need to figure out, did they die? Didn't they die? They just sort of fall down these holes in this Fortress of Solitude. But Superman, he literally just squeezes Zod's hand and then throws him down a ditch, and then that's it. Yeah. And I was just like, I needed more of that. Like, if this is the last time that we're going to see those three characters, if this is Superman's showdown with Zod, I need more than that. Like, they are too good of villains to just
fall down a big hole,
run out the film like that, and it left me feeling so
different.
meh.
I believe that's different in the other cuts. I believe they get so normally. First of all, you know, I don't want to be one of those guys, but Superman wouldn't kill anybody. Superman would never kill anybody.
No, I
so
guess he doesn't, does he?
He would put them back in the Phantom Zone.
That's the other thought I was having. I was like, put them back in the Phantom Zone. That's how the film starts. Oh fuck! I haven't seen this other cut. You know, I need to watch.
Spoilers if you've not seen it, but it's one of the big issues people have with Man of Steel is that at the end he just snaps his neck.
Oh yeah, but that's sick. I like that. I like Dark Superman.
Wouldn't do that.
I like Dark Superman.
I suppose. Look,
oh come on! I hate all this. Oh, this character wouldn't do this. This character wouldn't do that. It's like, nah, switch it up. Bring me something new. I love Dark Superman. He's my fave.
But no, and I'm not I'm not absolutely tied to that. I am with Batman because Batman is a bloke. So anyway, we're not going to get into that. But for me, I don't think he certainly wouldn't kill these Kryptonians because by pushing them down a hole, right? Because they're like, he's the last of his kind. So if there was 3 more, not to get into the horrible science of it, but also one of them's female, right? So like, you know, you could, you know, you see what I'm going with that. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting.
So like you say, put them back in the Phantom Zone.
That's the stronger. That is the
which
stronger.
Which I think happens in the Donner Cut, but I'm not actually 100% because I can't remember. But yeah, so and that comes back to the issues I think with which I have, which is around the 2 issues: the script and the general aging, which I've already touched on. So you quite liked the script, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. I think for the most part it's really good.
So for me, I thought it was one of the weaker parts of it, right? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, is it weak? Or has it aged? Because if you listen to the script, it's really quite comic booky. Because in comic books, if you don't know this, they're visual only, right? So characters do say stuff out loud that you wouldn't say. So there are bits in this where the script feels weirdly exposition dumpy. So when they're in the honeymoon suite, Lois goes, posing as honeymoon writers. And it's like, you wouldn't need to say that. You just show us, you don't tell us. But in a comic book, she would do that. If you look at comic book panels where characters realize what their powers are, they're always talking out loud to themselves, being like, oh my God, I can lift this car up. Well, obviously, you would just think that. You wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
so actually, I don't know if that's a failing of the film or just the fact that comic book films have aged in a way that this now looks really, really dated. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like they've become more sophisticated as time has gone on, and if you compare it to something like what was the last one, Endgame, like, you know, the script, everything about it does become a bit more sophisticated,
more subtle,
doesn't it? I suppose you learn to trust your audience a bit more.
And they treat them more like real people. So what they do is they take it and they go put this in the real world and have people speak, you know, obviously not to an absolute to the letter, because obviously people, you know, superheroes aren't real. Well, actual ones with superpowers anyway. So there is an element of that with the script, and a lot of it I'm sort of willing to let go. So that element of the exposition dumpiness and the way that the villains speak very hammily and all that sort of stuff, I don't mind. And then what that happens is that then informs the rest of it. So the costume feels quite comic booky, but has also aged quite badly, particularly the villains' costumes. Like you say, that they look like they're in a sort of like a MC Hammer video or something. Like
I think they look great.
No, but they look like they would look in the comic books. It's just it's aged. Yeah. What I'm saying is I'm willing to forgive that element of it because it has that sort of nostalgia. It has that kitsch value where you go, but that's just what it was like. And the way they're made now will look weird in 30 years' time. Do you know what I mean? So, but then there are some other things that that I won't forgive the script for, which is things like, particularly at the ending, right? They write themselves into a corner and invent stuff to get themselves out. So they write themselves into the corner where Lois knows who Superman is. So, and they write themselves into the corner of what he's doing with Zod. So they just invent powers. So because they write themselves into a corner, they go, well, Lois forgets him because he kisses her. Well, what? Like, or they wrap themselves into a corner where, famously, there's a famous scene in this which has been parodied in Family Guy and stuff like that, where he takes a cellophane S off his chest and throws it at someone. Well, what's happened there is someone goes, wouldn't that look cool? But there's no reason for that. So what they sort of, I feel like they're inventing stuff because they can't figure out a better way to get around a bit, particularly the kissing, because she needs to forget who he is. So there is an element of like, well, you could have done something. I don't know. I just feel like they could have done.
But why? And why does she have to forget though? Like I didn't totally.
It's not clear enough, is
that
it?
She needs to forget. I just don't think it's necessary. Like, because you can still say, oh yeah, we can't be together, but good to be friends, and it's good that we know this about each other, and maybe that'll be helpful in the future or whatever. Because it's such a relief. Because early on in the film, she figures out that Clark Kent is Superman, and it's like, oh, thank God, because just how long was they going to pretend to keep up this facade of like, oh, I put my glasses on now, you'll never know who I am, sort of thing. So it's almost like, oh, brilliant, she's found out. Now we can see some genuine interactions between the two of them, and I just don't think it was necessary for the memory wipe thing to happen.
And
really,
that's definitely something that has died out as time has gone by. If you look, pretty much all modern superhero films have just done away with that.
Except for
Spider-Man and Batman.
That was pretty bad. Well, that was pretty bad with MJ, wasn't it? It was just like, oh, they're in a different world now and she doesn't know who I am.
But yeah, so there's definitely some elements with aging. Some of it, I'm completely willing to be like, that's just how that was at the time. And actually, it feels quite sort of, what's the word, text appropriate. It feels like the original texts. And some of it, it's like, it's a bit lazy and it's a bit underwhelming. But other than that, not loads from me. There was a few bits of effects where I was like, that's not very good. And there was a few bits of action where the way it was done was a bit, like, it made me laugh. Like, there's a bit where Zod goes into the Daily Planet and he knocks out Perry White. And the way Perry White does it, it's like he should have little Tweety birds going around his head. And it's a bit like, just knock him out. Don't show his reaction, because if you can avoid an actor having to act something that's as difficult as being knocked out, they don't have to act being knocked out. Just show them getting knocked out. So there was a bit of that about it, but it's not like that didn't take me out of it. I just was a bit like, that was a bit stupid. What about, is anything else you really didn't like, or have we covered everything there?
So there was just a couple of little things. The two things that I mentioned were the biggest offenders in this, and given the opportunity, I would want some more attention given to those things. Maybe work on it a little bit. But the other things are just so technical things. So I don't know about you, Josh, but this film was so fucking quiet. I had my TV turned up well into the 50s, right, which has never been necessary with anything that I've watched before, and I could still fucking barely hear what they were saying. It was so bizarre. So I was like, so you've not remastered
sound,
the audio or anything? Like, not even. I was like, just turn it up, because it's. I didn't like, if I go and turn my TV on now, is it going to still be on like 55 and it's going to blow my head off? When you're in
the car and you move from a podcast to your music. You're like,
yeah, or if you drive, like if you go from driving, late at night and you've got the radio blaring all your favourite songs or whatever, and then you go in the morning and you're all calm and tired and it's like, it's like, oh, fuck me. So I just thought that was a bit weird. And there was the odd issue with the editing that I noticed. So the action wasn't always matching. Some of the positioning and the continuity wasn't perfect and felt a bit disjointed at times. Not enough to ruin my enjoyment of the film, but enough that I noticed. So I had to mention it.
Okay, there. So, pretty balanced argument, I think. There, I think it's safe to say. There's some stuff that's not so good, but I think ultimately, it's nostalgia, it's legacy, very much lives on, and I'm interested to know how it did critically. So I'm trying to think if I'm gonna have a guess, because you've also led on to me.
What would you?
I actually think the critics will probably have been kinder to this than the audience, because I can see at the time audience were probably quite kind, but I can imagine now 2022 nerds being like, and he throws a cellophane S and he doesn't have a cellophane S, so I'm 1%, right?
You mean
a bit like exactly what I did. But
your mum wouldn't kill anyone, though. We wouldn't kill anyone.
Listen, it wouldn't kill any. Right? No, we wouldn't. No. So how do I think it did? I think the audience I think at the time it was probably fairly even. In fact, do you know what? I think it's probably swapped. I think it's swapped. So I reckon that brings it quite middling. So I'm going to say like a solid 7. I'm going to go for. I reckon that's what it's getting. What would I give it? Maybe slightly lower. Maybe a 6, a 6.5.
Really? Yeah, into the 6s. But, oh my God.
Or maybe 6.5. I'd say just. But then I'd be interested to watch the Donna cut and know if it's any better.
Oh, I'm literally going to go do that right now.
So go on, how did it do? Lay it on me.
So on IMDb at the time of recording, it gets 6.8.
Right.
Which I thought was pretty fucking stingy, to be honest. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, Superman 2 gets, from the audience, 76%. And then from the critics, 83%.
Oh, so I wasn't far off with the critics and the audience thing.
Indeed.
So that averages out then at 75. So I have to say it's not overrated because it's slightly over what I'd say, but I would say it's appropriately rated.
So I mean.
Oh, I feel it's.
I kind of feel like it's a little bit underrated. I just thinking about like the emotional connection and the emotional reaction that I had while I was watching it. I think the critics score 83% is perfectly appropriate, and I wouldn't sort of disagree with that. The IMDb score I definitely think is too low. Going into the 6s with this, I do think is criminal at 6.8. The audience score, I don't know, man. I do kind of feel like I'd still give it a bit higher. I wonder if I would give it an 8. I reckon it's underrated, you know? I think after all that, I reckon Superman is definitely underrated. It's probably not underseen. I don't know. There's a good chance that it is being seen by modern audiences because it's a superhero film, right? So probably not underseen. But I reckon that's a little bit underrated, you know.
So we've got a bit of a split decision then, haven't we?
Yes,
it's a split decision. There we go. A little bit like Rocky Balboa.
Listeners, what do you think?
A little bit like Rocky Balboa. We'll put it out to the listeners. So I think it's appropriately rated, and Alice thinks it's underrated. So put it out to you. What do you think? An average of 75 is Superman 2 underrated?
Well, there we go. Superman 2 underrated.
Split decision.
I think.
Well, split decision.
Underrated.
Well, split decision.
Put it in the maybe pile for now, in the maybe underrated pile. But I'd be interested to know what the listeners think about that one.
I think they're more likely to side with you.
I do hope so. I do hope so, guys. I'm relying on you. Let's tell Josh he can suck it and that he's totally wrong about Superman 2. Anyway, Josh. My favourite time of the week, this. Tell us, what are we going to be watching for next week?
Well, I thought it was about time we tackled another classic film.
Yay!
So,
even though Superman, a little bit of a classic, but I didn't pick it for that.
So,
no.
I've got a few classics on my list and I'm really unsure what to pick. But I think I've nailed it down to one. So next week, we are going to be watching and talking about the classic that may or may not be, as in we'll decide. Not that, anyway. The film is Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean.
Oh, okay.
So, yes.
Ooh,
yeah, so cool. We'll put that out to the listeners in terms of whether Superman 2 is underrated or appropriately rated. Just side with me because I'm the better podcast host.
No, don't do it.
Join us next week where we'll be talking about Rebel Without a Cause, the James Dean film, to decide, is it a classic or is it not? In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us at filmsandthatpod@gmail.com, and we're on all the social medias, just search for us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You'll find us. Get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your suggestions for films we should cover, especially because Alice reckons she's running out. We're also on the television, Alice, aren't we?
We are indeed. We are on the local TV network every Friday from 6 p.m. talking about all our favourite underrated and underseen films. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Liverpool, Leeds or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. Or if you live anywhere in the UK and you have Sky, you can find us on Channel 188. That is every Friday evening from 6 p.m. on the local TV network.
Yes, there we go. Lots of ways to get in touch touch with us and see us and hear us. And thanks as ever for your support. It really does mean a lot, especially if you vote that Superman is appropriately rated. We will see you next week. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.